Hey everybody, back with part 2 of this video series. So if you didn't already catch part 1, that's where we started. We just started making the person class for this virus simulation. And so in this video, I'm going to take you through basically setting up our pygame window, drawing patient 0, having him move around the screen. And that'll pretty much take up this video. So some things we're going to do in this video. So I'm going to first start with a draw function in the person class, which will draw a circle. An update function, which in this case is just going to call the move function and update turn sick. And then in the main class, we're going to create a main class with a main function where we set up the pygame window. We create patient 0, who will be our first sick patient, and we will have patient 0 update and draw each frame. And all right, so if you want to try those things first, feel free to pause the video, see what you can come up with for that, and then watch for the solutions. Or if you just want to follow along, I'm gonna start here. So all right, so as we took off yesterday, we had this constructor and this move function. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a little draw function for the player class. Now, when you're drawing something in Pygame, you need to pass the surface in. I always call screen. I always call my surface the screen. You can maybe have a different variable for that, but I think screen makes sense to me, so that's what I end up using. Let's see. So what we want to do here is just basically draw a circle of radius r at position x, y. And in order to do this, we're going to need to implement the pygame libraries. So we're going to import pygame. If you don't have pygame already set up, you got to make sure that you set that up with your interpreter and all that. It's not an included library, so once we have that imported, then we can do a command something like pygame.draw. And again, we're using the circle here. So circle. And again, the parameters for drawing a circle, we need the surface, we need a color, we need the position, the radius, and the width. And so we're going to kind of do this in what I think is a pretty cool way, and a cool use of the dictionary data structure we've talked about before. So obviously the screen is going to be the surface here. The color here, we're going to do pygame color, and then for now we're just going to put in color, which we'll come back to that in a little bit. And then we are going to have to put in self x and self y as a pair of coordinates, as a tuple. That's our center point, and then finally our radius. Now, a couple things I'm going to add into this. One is, since we're making Vx and Vy uniform, not integers, they're going to be, okay, so they're going to be like changing between, sorry, let me restart that. Since we're making them uniform in terms of any decimal number, when we add these to x and y are going to be decimals as well, floating point decimals. The draw function in Pygame takes integers. So we need to cast x and y to integers. And I only want to do that in the draw. I don't want to round them elsewhere. I don't want to actually like change their values. It's just for drawing them. So they'll still have a position that's a decimal, but int will round it to the nearest. Well, it'll actually cut it off. So you could use math.round here as well. Or actually, I think it's just round in Python. So yeah, you could use round as well, and that might be a little more accurate. All right. Now let's talk about this color thing here. So in this color, what we're going to do is we are going to have a set of colors using a dictionary. And so if you'll recall dictionaries, they're basically a mapping, a one-to-one mapping of, I don't need self here outside the class. It's a one-to-one mapping of something to something else. So in our case, we're going to map our status to our color to represent that. So our first status is healthy. And so if status is healthy, then that means that my color for healthy should be, we'll make these white. And then for our sick color, we'll make that red. And then lastly, for our recovered status, we'll make this blue. And so we're going to use this dictionary down here for this color. So I'm gonna take pygame color, and then I'm gonna say self.colors to access the dictionary, and inside of that, I'm gonna put the string status. So if the status is equal to healthy, then the color will be healthy. If the status is equal to sick, then the color will be sick. And if the status is equal to recovered, the color will be recovered. Now, the reason why this is a good way of doing this is, let's say later on I wanted to implement another feature where maybe I have immune as well. And so those are going to have different behaviors, and I want to add a different color. It's very simple to just go into here and say, okay, if the person is immune and I have another status, maybe we make them gold or something like that. So it's very quick and easy to add other status features. All right, so we've got our draw feature. We've got our move, and I'm gonna just change this a little bit right now. So the move function will work well on its own, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna put all of our logic in a function called update. I really like doing this in general. I think that it's a good way of organizing code. Whenever you have a game loop or some type of simulation loop that's going to loop every time, I like naming a function update that I know will execute once per frame. So execute once per frame, and that way I know, okay, let me go into here and let's say let's for now just call the move function. And then one more thing we're going to do before we go over to our main is in our update function, after we move, we're going to update the turn sick thing here. So if you want to try and do that, the pseudocode of what we're going to be doing is we're going to be checking to see if the person's status is sick, then update turn sick by 1. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add in a recovery time variable. So the recovery time, we could make it unique in terms of if we want to make it unique to the object, we could put it here. And then maybe have it, a random integer or something like that from, maybe 100 to 150 or whatever. So that's one option. So each person has its own unique recovery time. Or option number 2 is you could make them all have the same recovery time, where you would put it here. So it's really up to you. I'm going to actually leave it in as a variable, so we can actually get a random range in here. And now what we'll do here, and again, if you want to pause the video and try and do this, what we're going to do is we're going to check to see how many turns they were sick, and if their turn sick is equal to the recovery time, then we'll set their status to recovered. Okay, and so if you were able to do that, this is what it should look like. If the status of that person is sick, what you want to make sure of is that you're not updating turn sick unless they're actually sick. So we have to put that inside an if statement. So if they are sick, we will add 1 to turn sick. If they're not sick, we just don't do that part. So I don't want to do an else if here, because the next logic should happen regardless of whether they're sick or not sick. Well, actually, now I think about it, you could probably use an else if. Yeah. So no, I lied. Definitely just an if. If they're sick, they add 1 to sick, and then if they're turn sick, which will happen only if they're sick. If their turn sick is equal to the recovery time, then that means they're recovered. And so let's change their status to recovered. Now, okay, so yeah, you can't use an else if, but what you could do is you could indent this. And this will save a little bit of performance in terms of the if statements that the computer will check. So for each person, it will first check to see if they're sick. The only time a person is going to be recovered is if they are sick. And so there's no reason to check if turn sick equals recovery time if they're not sick, if that makes sense. If the person's healthy, then turn sick should be 0. And so we can just, change that logic a little bit. Okay. So that should change in terms of the object. That should work out nicely. Is there anything else we want to do on update? As of right now, I think we're good. We'll add in some more stuff later on. Okay, so what I want to do next is move into the main, where we actually initialize patient 0, update him, and work through that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a Python file here. I'm going to call this virus main. And we're going to import a couple libraries. So we're going to import pygame and random. I know I'm definitely going to need those ones. We'll create our main class, and then we'll call our main class down here. All right, now if you want to try and pause the video and go through this, and what I want you to try and do is just create a pygame window that has maybe 600 by 600. I'm going to use 600 by 600. A gray background. Control the frame rates with the clock function like we've done before. And if you just want to follow along, I'll go through that with you now. So, all right. So here's what it should look like if you try this on your own. This will be what it should look like. Make sure you initialize the pygame. I'm going to set 2 variables, width and height, to 600. This again goes back to that principle that I was talking about before. I could just as easily say, when I do my set mode function and I do the size here, I could just as easily put 600 and 600 in here. But again, if I make it a variable, it's easier to see that that's something that I should be able to change if I want to. This one's a little bit less necessary because screen has a get width and get height function. So once you do set them, you're able to get them back if you want. But I still like that. We're saving the screen surface area into a variable called screen, which we're going to be able to use later on to draw. We'll set our title here. So this is a display.setCaption function, which will call virus simulation. And then we'll just set a real quick background. So we'll fill the screen surface with the color gray, and make sure that you capitalize color here, capital C. That's different than the lowercase c, so that it actually works. All right, so this will give us our window, and then as we've done before, so these are all just like screen setup variables. As we've done before, we're gonna get our clock here, and so this is done using the pygame.time.clock. So we're creating a clock object here, and we're going to use this later on. I'm going to set my max FPS here to be, in this case, I'm just going to go 20 frames per second, but you can increase that to change the sim speed if you would like to. And then we're just going to have a couple other variables here. One of which will be this variable for our simulation running. And we'll add in more people or more things later on. As for our main loop, when we're using pygame, we want to use a while loop to continue each frame. We're going to update the display. So when you're doing a pygame loop, you got to make sure that you use this for loop to empty the event queue. So for event in pygame event.get, put this up a little bit more. What we want to do in there is just check to see if the user clicked on the X in the top right. And so we'll check if the event type is pygame.quit. That means they hit the top right box. Then we want to set running equal to false, and that will break out of our loop. Our main loop, each frame, it's gonna follow this kind of logic. We're gonna first update all the people, then we're gonna update our graphics, and then finally we're going to pause for a frame. I don't know what the best way to describe that, but this is where we're going to use our clock function. All right. So updating people, right now we don't have any people, so we don't have anyone to update. As for the graphics, we want to redraw the background to show that the people are actually moving. Later on when we add a patient, I'll show you what happens if we don't have this line of code in here. So we'll make the screen color gray again, so that puts the background. We'll draw all the people, and then we will have this line here, pygame display.flip. This is a really crucial line of code. If you don't have this, pygame won't update your graphics, and you might think your code's broken, but it's not actually broken. And then finally, we have this tick max FPS. Once the while loop breaks because of the hitting the X, we're gonna call pygame quit. I'll exit out of everything. All right, so let's run this. Make sure we don't have any errors. Looks good. Pops up a window. We can move that window around. The X2 out of it. And so that's kind of part 2 of today. And then finally, what I want to do next is create patient 0, update him, and draw him. And then we'll wrap up for that today. So if you want to try that on your own, create patient 0. Patient 0 is the first person who is sick. He will not be practicing social distancing, and so you can create him and then try and get him to both update and then redraw the person. All right. So if you want to go ahead and try that, you can pause the video, give it a try, and then I will do it with you here. So, all right. So I'm going to put this right underneath variables. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to create all the people here, but I'm just going to start with one person called patient 0, who is going to be a person. And then I'm just going to put him at a random integer somewhere between basically the wall and the width for X, and the wall and the height for Y. And then in terms of, we're going to make him sick to start with. So he's going to be patient 0, and he's not practicing social distancing, so that's false. All right, so you see I have an error here. Depending on how you're writing this code, if you're using PyCharm like I am, the way it organizes things is inside of this package here, which I called virus simulation tutorial. If you're just using idle, all you would have to do is import person. For PyCharm, what we're going to do is we're going to have to import, from this module, from this package, virus simulation tutorial, and then the .person module, we're going to import the person class, and then it finds that. So from virus simulation tutorial .person, import person. All right, so we've created patient 0. Now, one thing I'm going to add in here, and I'll show you this guy in a second after we draw it. I'm going to have a spawn buffer. Instead of potentially him being drawn on the edge of the board with the 0, we're going to put in a little buffer so that they have to spawn inside the board. So we're going to add that in a little bit here. But to update the person, all we're going to have to do is call patient 0 and update himself. And in order to update the graphics, we're just going to call patient 0, and we're going to call draw on the screen. All right, and so let's see what happens here. So we get patient 0, and he's moving, and he will move off the screen here. Okay. So that works out nicely. Now a couple things I want to show you. If we don't have the screen fill line in here, if I comment that out, you'll see that you can actually see the trace of him, and that's not very useful for this particular instance. And then the other thing is, if you try this enough times, you'd eventually get him to spawn at like a width of 0 or somewhere between 0 and 5. And it's not likely, but it could happen. And that means like he would be on the edge of the border, and we don't want them to be able to move that close to the board, to the border. So we're going to put in a variable for the spawn buffer, and I'm just going to set this to be 10 pixels. You can set this to more or less depending on how you want to use this, but we're going to spawn him between spawn buffer and width minus spawn buffer. And for the Y position, spawn buffer and height minus spawn buffer. So that's just a real quick way of, adding that in. All right. So we've today in this video, we drew the function, we did the draw function and update function in the person main. We have him updating the turn sick. Just to see if that's actually working, I'm going to set the recovery time between 10 and 20 frames and see if he turns blue after, which he does. So he's recovered. So obviously we're going to want to set that a little bit higher so that he has time to infect other people. But we can play with that, and that should work. What else did we do? We set up the pygame window. We set up a frames per second clock. We spawned in patient 0, updated him, and then drew him on the screen. All right. So in the next video, we're going to have patient 0 be able to collide with the walls, collide with other people, and update velocities accordingly. And so I will see you in the next video.